Republican presidential candidate Dr. Ben Carson, a Seventh Day Adventist, was a Democrat until the age of 30. In 2006, he said that as a teenager he was completely out of control, an angry person trying to stab people. He said he would go after people with rocks, bricks, baseball bats and hammers. And when at 14 he tried to stab another teenager in the stomach with a camping knife, he was lucky the knife hit the boy's belt buckle and snapped in half, so he escaped a murder rap and years in prison. He says that he's reformed now. Today he's a vegetarian. He opposes abortion, even for victims of rape or incest. He has strong views about evolution, but has not read a single book on the subject. Oxford professor Richard Dawkins, a fellow of both the Royal Society and the Royal Society of Literature, ethologist, evolutionary biologist and writer, who at least studied the Bible before disagreeing with it, described Ben Carson's opposition to the proven science of evolution as disgraceful, saying that, as a doctor, Carson should know better. Dr. Carson attacked evolution at a Seventh Day Adventist gathering in 2011, and this is my reply to all the main points he made.
People who believe in God and who believe in the Bible can very easily explain from where they derive their ethical philosophies. People who believe in survival of the fittest might have a more difficult time doing that. Because when you believe in survival of the fittest, and you and another person are the only person there, and you're hungry, and you kill them and eat them, well, that's survival of the fittest. That's not necessarily the wrong thing to do. And if you believe as we do, and we get our ethical considerations from God, that would not even be a consideration.
Carson has obviously forgotten about other animals that have no religion at all, yet show great empathy to strangers among their own and even other species. After spotting a distressed baby bird struggling to stay afloat, this hero Labrador jumped into the water and picked up the bird in its mouth. He swam back to shore without injuring it and gently dropped the bird at the feet of his owner, who picked up the distressed animal. Carson thinks we're insects, living in the Carboniferous period, battling 2-foot-wide dragonflies and gobbling up other insects. That was 300 million years ago, Ben. Today we're intelligent humans with morals, ethics and the rule of law. While dogs, cats, dolphins, horses, elephants, apes and many other mammals have empathy for other strange animals, humans have a lot more, and will go to great lengths to help strangers in trouble, and this extends to animals and even plants in trouble. Like the other mammals, we developed this instinct for empathy long before religion came along. Ben, if you find a hero Labrador that learned to save lives by going to church, you let me know. In the meantime, survival of the fittest continues in other ways. Bad automobile drivers die in auto accidents. Good drivers survive better. Most folk susceptible to stress or overeating do not survive as well as others. Those indulging in drugs, alcohol, violence, fast cars, and crime live shorter lives than those who don't, on average. As for ethical philosophies, humans developed those long before any Seventh-day Adventist arrived on the scene, and not through religion, but through survival. One survived better if one did not take another man's wife, steal, lie, or cheat. Doing such things got you killed. Working together honestly was far safer and more productive, so morals were a necessity, not an invention. Early human tribes were honest with each other and respected a set of common sense values. If you murdered someone, the chances were very high you would in turn be murdered. So the instinct to avoid murdering evolved. This is why humans find it difficult to murder and feel sick about it if they do. This built-in instinct helps humans survive.
Interestingly enough, Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins, they were just outraged that Francis Collins and myself believed in God.
Dawkins and Dennett made it clear they have nothing against people believing in God. They said that in their opinion people should not believe in something that was not backed up by evidence, but never objected to a person's right to believe as they chose. Evolution is a scientific fact, so belief does not come into it, just as belief does not come into the fact that the Earth orbits the Sun, or that 1 and 1 equals 2. Dawkins wasn't outraged that Carson denies evolution, but he has called Carson a disgrace more recently, since the man is a doctor who should know better.
They said, you can't be a real scientist and believe in that. If you believe in God, you believe in the flying spaghetti monster. They were throwing out all these disparaging remarks.
These are lies. Listen to the entire debate, as I have, and you will see that Dawkins and Dennett were perfectly polite and voiced opinions backed by science, without being disparaging at any stage. At the 40-minute and 40-second mark of the debate, Dawkins politely said, "The flying spaghetti monster is not impossible." Carson is resorting to telling his fellow churchgoers bold-faced lies.
And at the end of the discussion, I said, "You've convinced me of one thing, and that is, I came from God and you came from a monkey."
I listened to all 47 minutes and 12 seconds of that discussion, and at no stage did Ben Carson say any such thing. As for his statement, "You came from a monkey," that is a common misinterpretation of evolution, trumpeted by ignoramuses whenever the subject comes up. Human beings and monkeys evolved from a common ancestor. Here is the primate family tree. Ben Carson's monkeys are way over on the second from the left, next to lemurs and bush babies. Humans are way over on the right. Saying we came from monkeys is like saying that because bread is made up of flour, water, salt, fat and yeast, salt must have come from flour. Well, salt didn't come from flour, Ben Carson, and humans didn't come from monkeys.
I also had an opportunity to have a debate publicly with Don Johanson, the famous archaeologist who discovered Lucy. He's an anthropologist.
It's Dr. Don Johanson, and Dr. Johanson is a noted paleoanthropologist, not archaeologist nor anthropologist.
The so-called missing link.
That is another lie. Scientists don't use the term missing link, as it refers to a pre-evolutionary view of nature. The proper term is transitional fossil. The term missing link refers back to the originally static pre-evolutionary concept of the great chain of being, a deist idea that all existence is linked from the lowest dirt through the living kingdoms to angels and finally to God. The idea of all living things being linked through some sort of transmutation process predates Darwin's theory of evolution. The term was first used in 1851. Some people still use the term to refer to missing fossils, but it is misleading, as any known transitional fossil, like Java Man, is no longer missing. The discovery of more and more transitional fossils continues to add to our knowledge of evolutionary transitions.
And, he shows this all over the world, this little skull with a protruding mandible and a receding forehead.
Lucy, or Australopithecus afarensis, is in fact 40% of a skeleton, not just pieces of a skull. And it is in thousands of books, magazines and films, and replicas of it are in hundreds of museums and exhibitions around the world. Wikipedia it, it's there too. In 2007, Lucy went on a tour of the United States and was then returned to Ethiopia. It wasn't about Johanson showing it so much as it was about people around the world begging to see a very important find. It was extraordinary for the large fraction of the skeleton recovered and the significant amount of new information it provided, and for its age. Lucy is 3.2 million years old. The skeleton provided evidence of a walking gait that was bipedal and upright, akin to that of humans. This supported the view of human evolution that bipedalism preceded increase in brain size. The popularity of Lucy obviously irritated Ben Carson to no end.
I'm a neurosurgeon, and I operate on a lot of people who have, deformed skulls and things. And, eventually they die and they get buried. And years later, somebody like you comes along and finds their skull and said they found a missing link, He didn't appreciate that.
This is a skull with a deformed nasal cavity. Any paleoanthropologist knows the difference between a real skull and a deformed one, or one that's been operated on. Implying that Dr. Johansen couldn't tell the difference would be like Johansen telling Carson he couldn't tell the difference between a brain and a kidney. Bones, skulls, skeletons are what paleoanthropologists specialize in. They can instantly identify any of a great range of bones just at a glance, and know very well whether the bone was diseased, malformed, injured, broken, or operated on at any stage. Johansen would be many times better at this than Carson, since brain surgeons are not bone specialists and only work with modern humans. Had there been any indication or any reason to think Lucy was somehow deformed or operated on, this would have been made into a major issue long ago. It wasn't, because all the experts side with Johansen. The world's scientists not only disagree with Carson, they mock the guy openly as a buffoon.
But I said, why is there just one of them? Why isn't there a whole colony of them? How can you dig up this one little thing and then extrapolate?
First, it wasn't one little thing, it was a collection of bones comprising 40% of a skeleton. Secondly, there are other fossils. Johansen did not immediately see Lucy as a separate species, but considered her an older member of Australopithecus africanus. The discovery, however, of several more skulls of similar morphology persuaded most paleontologists to classify her as a species called Afarensis. Ben Carson doesn't know about those other skulls and skeletons because he hates the whole science of paleontology and wants nothing to do with it. There are tens of thousands of fossils that have been discovered while he's been busy chanting about missing links. He thinks the jigsaw only has a few pieces in it, when in fact great chunks of it are finished, mostly thanks to molecular genetics.
And that's what those who are creationists tend to do. Make these gigantic extrapolations without real evidence of what's going on.
I agree. Creationists do indeed make gigantic extrapolations without real evidence. Their biggest is the existence of a God they think they know, and a book they say their God wrote, without the slightest bit of evidence.
They look at all those layers, and then they find some fossils in one of the layers, and they says, this fossil is this many years old because it's in this layer.
This is another example of Ben Carson's ignorance about how paleontologists work. When they discover something in the field, they guess its age according to the geology, but every important sample is then dated using radiometric dating, radiocarbon dating, argon dating, or thermoluminescence dating, and others. A small amount of the substance is sent away to labs to be dated, and the results are very accurate. Sometimes the same sample is dated 2 or 3 times just to make sure.
That's how they explain the age of all these things. It's very circular reasoning, and really it has no real scientific validity.
The dating techniques used to date samples is very scientific. It's done by scientists. They should know.
And many people don't know this, but Charles Darwin actually started out in a seminary to become a man of the cloth. He had some experiences with God that didn't go his way, like his 10-year-old daughter who died of pneumonia despite his pleas.
Ben Carson says Darwin started in a seminary to become a man of the cloth, and then implies he gave up this plan because his daughter died. That is mischievous manipulation of the facts. Darwin did not start out in a seminary. He started out at Edinburgh University studying medicine for some years. Then his father enrolled him at Christ's College, Cambridge in 1827 for a Bachelor of Arts degree as the qualification required before taking a specialised divinity course and becoming an Anglican parson. However, he was never very religious. From Oxford Journal's Bioscience, an article called 10 Myths About Charles Darwin, we see the following quote. Like his father and the rest of the males in his family, Darwin had little use for established religions because he thought they were authoritarian and discriminated against those who did not accept them. His statements on religion suggest that he was a deist. That is, he accepted the presence of some kind of creator but avoided the words Christ, Saviour or Redeemer. Like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams and others, Darwin did not identify with any religious denomination in traditional terms. After the death of his 10-year-old daughter Annie, he lost faith in Providence. As he grew older, questions of religion simply ceased to interest him. The deathbed conversion story is a myth started by a profiteering woman who never actually met Darwin, as far as can be told. Why would poker face Ben Carson want to portray Darwin as some kind of fallen priest? Because it makes Darwin look weak, like someone who doesn't know what he's doing. It's mischievous and deceitful, and we see this again and again in the way Carson bends the truth.
And no one has ever demonstrated one species changing to another species.
This is another mischievous trick used by Pokerface Carson and fellow creationists, because species don't just suddenly become other species. It is a gradual process that takes many thousands or millions of years. Carson demands one skeleton that somehow proves humans were once fish, like some kind of crazy human/fish creature, half human and half fish. But in fact there is no such thing because the steps between fish and humans number in the hundreds of millions, not one. There is quite a robust assortment of fossils that show the evolution of mammals from reptiles, and plenty of well-documented DNA research proving beyond any doubt that we evolved from other species. But the process is very slow, involving thousands of mutations, not just one. Demanding some kind of fish/human creature is like demanding a T-model Ford/Ford GT mutant car to prove that Ford GTs evolved from T models. What you actually have is hundreds of designs stretching over more than a century to the GT, and not just one mutant car in between. These are just the Fords made in 1958. So you can see how many steps would be taken in a century, and animal evolution has millions more steps than cars.
You know, Darwin said his whole theory depended on the fossil remains. And he said we should be able to line up from a single cell organism to man several miles long and just walk right down the fossil trail and see how everything evolved. And he said the only reason they didn't have the fossils is because they were not geologically sophisticated enough, but that we would be in 50 to 100 years. Well, that was 150 years ago. We still haven't found them. Where are they? Where are the fossil remains?
This is another lie by Ben Carson, who knows very well hundreds of thousands of fossils have been found that show clearly how we evolved, and he also knows that DNA proves it on the molecular level beyond a shadow of doubt. Carson knows that Darwin had no knowledge of genes or DNA, and that his prediction came true as soon as we were able to map genomes, because they prove the genetic links from humans all the way back to single cells.
But when you ask the evolutionists about that, they say, I don't know where they are. They're somewhere. We just haven't found them yet.
Yet another lie from Ben Carson. Evolutionists don't say that at all. They always explain that we have indeed found them in tens of thousands of fossils and tons of DNA evidence that together prove evolution conclusively.
The interesting thing about evolution, about natural selection, is that it claims that anything that isn't useful disappears.
Untrue. Firstly, evolution does not claim anything as it is not a person. Secondly, evolutionists do not claim that anything that is not useful disappears. They are always discussing the many useless things not yet fixed by natural selection. Some examples include the pelvis and femur in snakes and whales, and ostrich wings, the human appendix, the male nipples and the tailbone. Other examples, like the laryngeal nerve of the giraffe, show bad designs. In that case, a nerve in the giraffe's neck only needs to be 2 inches long, and for various reasons that Richard Dawkins explains, it ended up being 15 feet long. You can see that video on YouTube. It's just one of many mistakes that evolution made, precisely because there is no conscious designer or engineer at work.
According to the theory, it had to go and there was an eyeball overnight, just like that, because it wouldn't work in any other way. And when you ask the evolutionists about that, they say, well, we don't understand everything.
No evolutionist ever said that an eyeball just appeared out of thin air. Like any other developments in evolution, it developed very slowly, stage by stage, over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. In the beginning, the eye was nothing but a few light-sensitive cells on a flat plane that allowed a simple animal to tell night from day, light from dark, which was useful. Over millennia, a cup began to form, allowing the animal to tell which direction light came from, which is also handy. Over millions of years, the cup evolved into a ball with a hole in it, like a pinhole camera, allowing the animal to see in a blurry way and to tell more accurately where light was coming from. Eventually, a primitive lens began to form, which allowed the animal to focus light more accurately, so its vision improved. This process continued until the eye worked well, but eyes can develop in a number of ways. Insect and octopus eyes are totally different again and evolved in their own ways.
How are flowers able to reproduce? Pollination. How does pollination occur? Bees and other creatures. Now, according to evolution, plants came along before the bees. So, how do plants reproduce?
A simple search online shows that the first flowering plants appeared 200 million years ago. A simple search online shows that the first insects appeared 400 million years ago. So insects were there 200 million years before the flowers. Sure, plants came before insects, but no flowering plants, which had to evolve. Once again, if Ben Carson bothered to read one book on evolution before going around the world preaching, he might have avoided embarrassing himself like this.
According to evolutionary model, we really came from an amoeba. And amoebas, they just like split, and then there's two amoebas. So it seems to me like, according to the evolutionary model, you do things that are efficient. So rather than going out and looking for a mate, you would just divide, and there'd be two of you.
Humans do not come from amoeba. They share a common ancestor that was similar to amoebas. The fact that all life on Earth evolved from a single-celled organism that lived roughly 3.5 billion years ago was confirmed in 2010, some 150 years after Darwin's prediction of a universal common ancestor. Biochemists at Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts, stated that the odds of this being correct, according to their genetic research, were astronomically enormous. They said the probability that humans were created separately from everything else is 1 in 10 to the 6,000th power, or in layman's terms, no chance at all. Carson's comic book idea that just because life started with single-celled entities, that their very complex, intelligent, multicellular descendants have to behave like single-celled life forms is bizarre. Somehow, he has never learned that things develop and change, and that 3.5 billion years is a long time. If Model T Fords can become Ford GTs in a century, imagine what they would become in 3.5 billion years. Apparently, Carson's imagination can't cope with that. He believes that if we started out as single-celled animals, we must still be single-celled.
But, things are supposed to work in an efficient way. So according to the evolutionary model, we would be less pugilistic, and we'd be much more logical, we'd be much more creative. We wouldn't be going around fighting each other and cutting off people's heads anymore, because that stuff would have been extinguished and we would have evolved into something much better.
Humans are much better than Carson describes. He thinks we're all going around fighting each other and cutting off people's heads. Maybe because, as a teenager, he was angry, completely out of control, and trying to stab people. Maybe that murderous anger is still inside him, hiding under the Bible propaganda he swallowed. However, the vast majority of humans are peaceful, polite, and well-mannered. It's only a very small minority that cause problems. So to answer the doctor's claims, humans have already evolved into something better. We are much better than the wild animals we once were. We have morals, ethics, and the rule of law, and we developed those long before churches came along with their bloodthirsty suicide bombers or pedophile priests.
Why is it somebody's drowning? For the most part, you're not just going to walk by. You're going to try to throw them something. If you can swim, you're going to jump in and save. That doesn't work in the evolutionary model, because the evolutionary model says survival of the fittest. You would just say, do that and just keep walking. Now, some people do that, but most people, they see somebody struggling. There's something inside of them that says, help. That makes no sense whatsoever in the evolutionary model.
The very reverse is true. Church people say, he'll be in heaven soon, so we don't really need to worry. Normal people have great empathy for those in need. It's a human instinct formed over millennia. Feeling empathy for strangers in trouble is a common human attribute. We often cry when we see others suffering. How does it benefit us from an evolutionary point of view? That's simple. If humans have this instinct to help others, then they will want to help us when we're in trouble, which is a great insurance to have. We all benefit from it at some stage. Ben Carson has shown very clearly that he doesn't mind bending the truth, and even lying, to defend his bigoted religious views. He is pompous and arrogant enough to lecture on a subject he refuses to study, and so egotistic he thinks it's his sublime right to condemn evolutionists as single-celled protozoa or monkeys, incapable of having morals. He is a small-minded snob, an elitist Bible basher, and a fool. Yes, he was a brain surgeon, but From what I've learned, I'm glad I was never on the end of his scalpel. If you agree or disagree, please say why in the comments below. Well, that's my 2 cents worth. Talk to you again soon.